I'm Carl, and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we're starting a new type of genre, although we've sort of run out of genres, so we're doing different types of videos. Last week was our first version, which I enjoyed a lot, which was film scores. So while we're sort of branching away from genres, there's still going to be a couple more genres down the road, but I want to jump right into top 10 performances of the decade because I thought that would be a neat topic. But if you agree, I'd love to hear your comments down below. This episode is the 10 to 7 episode. Next week will be the 6 to 2 episode, and then finally number 1 episode on what I think is the best performance of the decade, which of course will encompass my entire top 10 list broken out into 3 different parts. But this video is the longest. I give 5 honorable mentions as well as my picks from 10 to 7 in this video. And if you don't want to hear a certain topic or a certain type of performance, you can look in the timestamps in the comments down below, and you can skip around and click on what you performance you want to talk about or hear me talk about. So jumping right into things, going with my first honorable mention, it is Matt Damon from The Martian. I think this is a performance that is the total encapsulation of what a movie star is. And that's a distinct difference I want to make between being a good actor or great acting and being a movie star. Now, a lot of movie stars are also great actors, but that doesn't mean they're mutually exclusive. I think that to be a movie star, it's just a presence. It's sort of an it factor. It's a heavy dose of charisma, good looks, and overall confidence. And especially in the 2010s, we've seen less and less of the movie star. Something like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's kind of maybe one of the few ones that could just put out something like Rampage and it makes some money. And even then, it's a little bit of a hit or miss situation. Unlike something like Julia Roberts in the 90s, who could just put out any movie with her name and it would have made money. But that doesn't mean movie stars don't exist, and I think Matt Damon's, his face in space, and the movie is really sold as Matt Damon in space, and it makes $600 million at the box office, and gets nominated for a bunch of Oscars. But that's not to say the movie's not good, because it's actually a terrific movie. It's a thrilling blockbuster. We talked about it on my top 10 sci-fi movies of the decade list, so if you want to hear more about the movie itself, you should check out that video and that list. But in terms of Matt Damon's performance, he has these long stretches of the film where he is by himself, that it has a terrific ensemble cast, but there's just these moments of him by himself, and he is able to entertain and able to engage you because of his wit, especially with his character of Mark Watney, because of his just engaging charisma and charm, that his presence and his sort of it factor is kind of hard to explain in that sense, but that factor, that charisma that he has, is able to engage you when no one else is on the screen, when it's just him and he's able to process information. This is very much a process-based movie, so he's narrating things, he's telling you how he's doing things. And now that's not to say that it's only great and fun and positive spirits, even though a lot of that movie is. There are moments that allow for Matt to actually show off some of his acting chops, the more emotional moments. That's not just all one-note movie star charisma, have a good time kind of a lane. That, especially when he gets rail thin near the end and some of the doubt starts to creep in, and the realization that we come into that he's been alone for years at this point, that it really has a sort of a mental impact on him, and we get to see some of those more emotional scenes. So we revel in the success, but also sort of talk about the failures as well. And I think just as a movie star / comedic performance, we don't really want to see Matt Damon transform into Mark Watney. We just want to see Matt Damon be Matt Damon and grow some potatoes in space, and that's what the movie is, and it's all the better for it. Then my next honorable mention is Ralph Fiennes for A Bigger Splash. Ralph is an interesting actor this decade. He had, of course, Voldemort in the sort of beginning. He also was M in James Bond, did some voiceover work. But I think post-English Patient, people, and Schindler's List in that sort of area, people thought he was, of course, destined for an Oscar, that he'll get one day, and hasn't been nominated since English Patient. And he didn't really become that sort of signature leading man and tried a rom-com, and that didn't really work. So now as he's sort of evolved into the 2010s, he's done some more villain roles or more supporting roles, but he's really an interesting actor. And I think I almost went with Monsieur Gustave, his role in the Grand Budapest Hotel, but ultimately I went with Harry Hawks from A Bigger Splash, because I think we've talked a lot about Grand Budapest Hotel, and I really liked A Bigger Splash. And he's very much a boisterous, eccentric, almost physical representation of an extrovert on screen. And I think that he's totally embodying a character that we all know, and that's sort of a type of acting where they're able to represent this type of person, this sort of personality trait that everyone has in their life or has known at one point in their life, and that is the sort of total extrovert, boisterous, annoying but incredibly likable. And when he's with you, he's 100% locked in, and when he's not, and then it feels like almost a hole that he's with you for maybe an hour, and then his attention will be diverted. And the film uses him in a unique way, oftentimes just allowing the camera to linger on him as he dances around listening to records and telling old stories, and he's incredibly captivating. But then also not using him, that when he's not in it, you can see how sort of peaceful and relaxing and sort of private it can be because he's not on the entire time. And I think there's a reason why every time he's on screen you're attracted to him, that he is kind of annoying at some points, but he's incredibly interesting because of his just approach to life and his carefree kind of extroverted attitude. And there's a reason why he's so attuned and why we're always so locked in on the screen. For a movie that doesn't really happen, we're always sort of drawn in, and that has a lot to do with just his physicality and his over-the-top gestures to really capture this kind of guy and this type of person. So if you haven't seen A Bigger Splash, check it out, from Luca Guadagnino, who's the director of Call Me By Your Name and the Suspiria remake, so definitely check it out. It's a terrific film. Then my next honorable mention is Rosamund Pike from Gone Girl. This is a decade-defining role, in my opinion, and one that will define her career, I think, for the rest of her life. Rosamund's an actress who didn't really break out with this movie. She didn't really break out until this movie. She's sort of done smaller English movie supporting roles, but really this one, once you see the movie, you just immediately go, who is this person? Why haven't they been in more movies? Because she is so in control, that there's sort of a duality with her character and in how the film is just structured. That the first big part of the film, she's away, that it's all in these sort of flashbacks, that it's Nick, Ben Affleck's character, Nick Dunn's perspective of Amy and what he thinks of her in their sort of early days of the relationship and sort of the romantic ideal, and then eventually when the sort of mid-reveal happens, and then that sort of second half of the movie, we see how sort of more calculating and cold she is. In that first half, we sort of get the lingerings, and that the first half we don't really see her. It's all in a flashback, so it's all just almost a different interpretation of that character. So when the second half comes, and it's almost a different version of the character. It's the same character, but it's a different perspective on it. The first half is Nick's almost perspective, and the second half is Amy's perspective, telling her story. It's a unique kind of changing character of how Rosamund is, and we see some more of her for evil intentions and sort of the cold calculatingness that she sort of delivers her lines of dialogue, and how in control she is throughout the sort of movie until she's maybe not. I think she delivers one of the best monologues, if not the best monologue, of the decade in the cool girl speech, which was that midway reveal. And she's just an actress where I think sometimes with an actor, they may be hiding something, but they're very clearly telling it to you. There's going to be next week's video, I'm going to be talking about an actress who really does that well. But oftentimes, actors will want to communicate to you directly, that they want to let you know what they're thinking, and that sort of dialogue that they have within the audience. But then some actors and some performances, like in this one, we don't know what's going on, and that makes it even more haunting and more chilling, that the character is always one step ahead, and that's embodied and physically manifested through Rosamund's performance, through her cold sort of line delivery, her sort of confidence and directness of how she sort of just moves around a space, and like she knows and has been thinking about, and just totally a consummate professional executing this. She's scary, she's alluring and attractive and mysterious, and a totally game-changing role, and definitely a performance that I can't imagine anyone else doing, and I think that's a real signature. That's how you know it's a real signature performance of this decade. So Rosamund Pike from Gone Girl, terrific performance. Had to make an honorable mention. Next, I want to highlight Saoirse Ronan from Lady Bird. This is a comedic performance, and I don't unfortunately have a comedic performance on this list. I think oftentimes they sort of get left to the edges, and I think actually Matt Damon's performance in The Martian is actually quite comedic and funny, even though some people maybe not think so. I thought it's very much a movie star charisma based, but I think Lady Bird is much more of a funnier movie, and a lot of that comedic elements come from Saoirse Ronan and her line delivery and her character, of course, of Lady Bird. Now, it's almost hard to say that this movie is a comedy, because sometimes it changes scene to scene. Sometimes it changes, within a scene sometimes, going from the large range of emotions, from happy to sad to melancholy to romantic. It sort of goes and runs the gamut. But that's what's interesting about Saoirse and her performance, and how attuned she is and in line with it she is within the movie. That within the movie it's 90 minutes, but there's incredible range of emotions, and I think that sort of represents properly the sort of teenage experience, that it's very hormonal, that every day is the most dramatic thing, and it always sort of changes, and friends come in and out of your life and the good ones stay. I think that's an incredible talent Saoirse has. I mean, she's been nominated for like 4 Oscars now. She's just turned maybe 25, 26. She's going to have, I think, a great career ahead of her. But I also think that her most defining role, at least in her early career period, will be Lady Bird, because of how well she embodies this sort of teenage American high schooler, and her ability to sort of mirror how the film is. So the film, like I said, goes from happy to sad to melancholy, romantic, all over. And then her performance, Saoirse Ronan's performance, is able to reflect that she can deliver lines that are very comedic and funny, but then also kind of sad and maybe tinged with a little bit of melancholy. You know, a lot of times her interactions with her mother can go from, you know, confrontational to angry to, oh wow, this dress is cute, in sort of an instant. And that sort of balance that Saoirse is able to do, and do believably, not only works well within the themes of the film, the sort of idea of teenage and the emotions sort of going up and down, but just an incredible, impressive feat by herself, that she can have these, you know, very funny comedic line deliveries, but then also have sort of these delicate moments with, say, her dad or her brother, and that's a unique thing that she's able to do, that she's able to switch emotions almost within scenes, but then also within different characters, that her and her dad have a different relationship than her and her mother, than her and her best friend, and that sort of different avenues of relationships that that require different emotions and different tackling of scenes, while also adding sort of a comedic tinge to a lot of it. It's just it's a high wire act of what Saoirse is doing, and I think she's an incredible actress and has a great bright future ahead of her. And I mean, hell, she's probably going to win an Oscar in the next few years anyways, so I'd love to see that. And I really enjoyed this movie. But then my next honorable mention, the final one we're going to be talking about in this video, is Toni Collette from Hereditary. So if comedic performances are their own sort of sub-type of performance, I think horror performances are their own in a way as well. And this movie is very interested in the theme of grief, and I talk about the movie and sort of the technical aspects, and of course Toni Collette's performance in my #1 horror movie of the decade video, which was Hereditary. So I have a whole video talking about Hereditary if you want to hear more about it. But in terms of Toni Collette's performance and analyzing that a little bit deeper, I think that this movie and her performance, you know, in the beginning, is very much interested in grief, and very much interested in sort of processing that and how people process that. But later on in the film, you know, the first half or so can be, you know, taken from any sort of grief movie, Manchester by the Sea, Margaret, what have you. But I think in the second, especially the third act, in the last even 15 minutes, you have to sort of believe that, lean into sort of the more horror elements, the more supernatural elements, and the weirdness of the film. And it has to be sort of a great gradual sort of incline towards it. That, you know, something like Lily Taylor's performance in The Conjuring is someone that is really sort of a normal person, and then transforms into this demonic presence. Of course, it's still the same person, it's still the same actress, but you believe that sort of transition. So similarly here with Hereditary, the more bad stuff that sort of happens, more unspeakable things that happens to Toni Collette's performance and to her character, Toni Collette's performance becomes deeper and deeper and deeper into this hole, so that by the time we come to the very end, it's almost understandable what she does. And that sort of gradual transition into just grief, into extreme grief, into maybe just desperation and total elements of just whatever you can do, that element felt natural. I think that allows, because Toni Collette is able to have this sort of connective tissue throughout the three performances, throughout the 3 different acts of the movie. And she has these moments of, you know, wanting to love her kids, but then having problems with her parents. And we have this sort of big, long monologue in a sort of a group therapy sort of session. And it's a sort of great pan-in, and she delivers this incredible, great long monologue. And she has those moments where are sort of maybe more dialogue-based, traditional-based, but then even the more physical aspects of just the intense physical sobbing and pain that she is able to communicate with her body is incredible and unparalleled, and feels so raw and feels so intimate and kind of personal because of how Toni Collette approaches this character and what she's able to bring out of it. It's stunning, and she's a large reason why that Hereditary is the best horror movie of the decade. But jumping now into the official list, my number 10 pick, I went with Carey Mulligan from Wildlife.
I'm 34. Does that seem like the wrong age? Would you like it better if I said I was 50?
No, 34 is all right.
All right. Well, I won't be this age forever, so don't get used to it.
From an underappreciated gem of this decade, Carey Mulligan plays a 50s American housewife whose husband goes to fight wildfires, and then she sort of has a existential revelation / mental breakdown. Now, the movie is from an interesting perspective because it's from the sort of kid's perspective, from the child's perspective, in the middle of sort of their parents' dissolution of their love, we'll call it. And in a way, we can sort of see Carey Mulligan's performances from two different angles. One, which is maybe how the movie is interpreting in terms of we're seeing it from the kid's perspective, which is this idea that she's this sort of perfect, doting 50s housewife that doesn't work, who, does laundry in the background and is very supportive and positive. But then when her husband goes and fights the wildfires, she feels totally alone. They just moved to Montana, a place they don't know anybody, and she feels sort of desperate and has this sort of entrepreneurial, almost survival instinct that kicks in and tries to better themselves, and because she doesn't like the situation that she is. So in a way, from the son's perspective, it goes from sort of positive, doting housewife to sort of intense, brutal, reveal everything kind of a motherly figure. It's kind of this two different opposites. Now we can also interpret it, knowing that it's from the kid's perspective, that maybe a more sympathetic view of she did her best and now she's going back to the way she was when she was younger, before she had met the husband, and is just being actually her true self, that you're not exactly sure which one is which. And that's what's great about Carey Mulligan, is that she's able to sort of play both those angles. In the beginning, at least from the film's perspective and how she is that she's very positive. She's trying to create this great family environment, that they've moved to this new place, but she's trying to be supportive and be there for her son and then also for her husband, and seeing the sort of bright and the new start elements of this life. So that when her husband does go to the wildfires, she has this moment of just being completely lost and confused and doesn't understand why, and almost existentially, I call it, sort of reflecting on her own life. And then she sort of makes a decision to try and better themselves, and will do it by revealing and sort of having these uncomfortable but very candid conversations with her son. And the way Carey sort of switches into that role is impressive, and feels like a different person, feels like a different almost character. And that's what she's able to do, is that create a new character while still sort of linking it back to that beginning one that we saw. That this new kind of character, this new kind of persona, is very much revealing and serious and nonchalant in some explicit details, and not sort of soft in its delivery. It's brutal, it's to the point, and it's no nonsense. And it's almost in very much sort of this cold, calculating kind of a response without sort of any general empathy. Now, what's different than, say, Rosamund Pike's performance in Gone Girl, which has a sort of similar energy, is that there's still a human element to it. That Rosamund Pike is a complete sort of idealization of this mastermind kind of a woman. But this one, you still sort of, she seems like she's a very real character, that she's trying to do her best for her family. She doesn't know if this is she wants to do the right thing for her family, and she doesn't know if this is the right path, but she's going for it because this is sort of her desperation. At one point in the movie, she says, do you have any other better ideas, kind of a situation, and reveals things, that there are these small moments of humanity, that she doesn't totally know what she's doing, and will reveal that to her kid, but that doesn't stop her from still committing to it. That it's a human person, it's a real person, but just rather making poor mistakes sometimes, or making bad mistakes. So it's a great dichotomy when you're invested and emotionally engaged in the film, is because you like her character because it's sort of the beginning part, but then when she makes this radical change, you're upset at her and kind of unsure about what she's doing and why she's doing it. But then when she sort of reveals other moments of humanity and being earnest and honest, and you can see that she's just trying to be as good of a mother as she can given the situation. You question maybe her motives and her decisions, but that doesn't mean you don't sympathize and empathize with what she's trying to do with her son and with her situation in terms of her social status. And the character itself is very complex. And I was thinking about this, and this is something I sort of struggled and we're still going to probably struggle throughout the list, and I kind of want to define it though, what I think of the difference between a great written character and a great performance. That oftentimes a great performance needs to have a great written character, and that you could have a really great character on the page, but then the performance is bad, or you can have a terrible character, but then the performance sort of elevates it and brings a lot to it. But I think most of these picks on this list are really well-written characters. So then you ask, well, what are the performances bringing to it? That this is a very complex character, but what is Carey Mulligan? Why is her performance and not, why am I rewarding her performance and not her having the ability just to play a great character in this case? So what I sort of figured out and determined was that, well, the script is just sort of says, she's a complex person, that she does this, that she has this sort of switch, or a sense of humanity within her as well. But that's sort of a really hard balance to toe the line, that you need to have a great actor to come and to have that balance between being kind of mean and strict and cold, hard, cynical kind of realism, with also that tinge of humanity and the switch, but also sort of balancing both. It's a hard line between sort of mean and evil, even, which sort of distinguishes her from, say, Rosamund Pike's character in Gone Girl. And I think, that's just written on the page, but Carey Mulligan has to bring that out of her. She has to bring a lot to the performance, either through these smaller moments that are in the script that allow us to directly understand her perspective, but also in the way she delivers her lines, that she's incredibly convincing as a sort of authoritarian figure in that sort of second and third acts, but then still has these moments of gentleness and empathy when she has some more candid moments with her son. So it's a complex character, yes, and it's a well-written character, I believe, but Carey Mulligan brings a lot to it, that she's adding a lot to the performance, that she's elevating it more than it was on the page. And I think that's why I define really as a terrific performance, with that ability to add to what is already a great, interesting, complex character by even adding more depth to it and succeeding and giving what the great character on the page actually was meant to be. Then, my 9th pick, I'm going to go with James Franco from Spring Breakers.
This is the fucking American dream, y'all. This is my fucking dream, y'all. All this shit. Look at my shit. I got shorts, every fucking color. I got designer t-shirts.
One of the strangest just going for it performances of the decade. James Franco plays Alien, a drug dealer, local rapper, idealization of what we all secretly maybe want and deem as success based on what culture has fed us. In a way, I think Alien and James Franco's performance as Alien is a great representation of the themes that the director Harmony Korine wants to express. Now, I'm a big fan of the movie. I did a Connor the Contrarian episode of it, and I think I'm going to be talking about it in the next coming weeks, because it's really a movie that I've always been drawn to. And I think one element and one piece of the movie that is so drawing towards me is James Franco's performance, that you could look at him and be, oh, well, this is silly, this is ridiculous, he's got all this craziness, why is James Franco trying to be this kind of, it's almost ridiculous in a way, and it is in a way ridiculous. But I think if you've seen the movie, and maybe if you haven't seen it in a while, give it a rewatch. It's not sort of what it was deemed in the marketing and when it first was released, that it is something, I think, a deeper, much more interesting. And I think James Franco's performance has a lot to do with that, because it represents the themes of the movie, which I've always have interpreted to believe as what we deem as success and what we consider this kind of lifestyle, that he is the representation of what maybe we secretly want to be, or what we've been told is this idea of success. And he's very much interested in his, so conscious with his, how other people perceive him, that he's much more interested in his persona rather than actually being an actual person. So that he's interested in having these great cars and all this money and all these drugs, and it's incredibly alluring, like a sort of devil-esque kind of figure. He's tempting you with these sort of elements, but then once it's revealed and we sort of understand the consequences of this lifestyle and how this sort of lifestyle is run, yes, it's interesting, but when we see how it is, some people are actually even more allured and interested in and tempted in that way, but then some people sort of reserve back and go, this is going on for too long. And then as we sort of go deeper and deeper, it becomes more into this sort of music video, pop, nightmarish, neon soaked kind of nightmare fuel. And it's a weird trip in that sort of third act, I think, and that's when we sort of go full into Alien. That Alien is sort of this figure that comes into our world, but then once we get into his world, that it's completely different. And I think James Franco plays Alien like an alien. He's got these huge sunglasses, the grills, the tattoos, and the way he speaks, he's almost got this southern or midwestern draw to how he sort of draws out his words, but he's from Miami and sort of has that sort of beach life kind of vibe towards him. So he's very hard to place as a character. You don't know where he's from, and if you could tell me he's from Minnesota, I believe it, and you could tell me he was born and raised in Miami, and I could believe that too. And how the sort of non-linear structure and narrative of the film works adds to the mysteriousness of the performance, that we never really know where he's from or his backstory, anything like that. And even when we get to know a little bit more about him, like I said, because of the non-linear structure, we get one sort of brief moment and maybe we'll flash back to another one and then go to another moment. And they just sort of these music video montage sequence moments sort of stitch all together so that he becomes, as soon as we think we know him a bit, he becomes something else. And he's almost an inexplicable character. James Franco, as an actor himself, has a great presence and charisma to him, and he embodies this by trying to be a performer within this movie. That the alien character in himself is a performer. He's trying to show off this luxury kind of a lifestyle to these girls and to impress them, and that's how in a way he sort of gets off. And that's this sort of appeal that he has when he has this sort of scene, look at all this. He's got this sort of braggadocious element, but that is how he interprets the world and wants to sort of draw in these girls. And I can't imagine the movie without it. There's a totally unique character and a unique performance, unlike any other real movie I've seen. Alien just really sticks out for me and has given us so many quotable lines of this decade that alone really should have made this list. And I think it's from a movie I really like, and I think a large reason why I like the movie is because of this sort of inexplicable cult leader-esque draw that Alien has, and how he's really a character played well by James Franco that is able to express the themes of the movie and really get a clear understanding of what the sort of movie is trying to say, or what the movie is trying to represent or give us sort of an idea about. Then my number 8 pick is Jake Gyllenhaal from Nightcrawler.
Done. I also want to stop our discussion over prices. This will save time. So when I say that a particular number is my lowest price, that's my lowest price. And you can be assured that I arrived at whatever that number is very carefully. Now, when I say that I want these things, I mean that I want them, and I don't want to have to ask again.
A pretty defining movie for me in my early movie-going career, because when I saw this movie, I finally sort of understood the art of acting. That previously, I think a lot of people can go, oh, I could do that, you just have to say the lines. But then when you see a sort of transformative performance like this, it's the first time I sort of went, oh yeah, I can't do that. That I was totally engaged and compelled by the movie in itself, that you just go, yeah, that's totally something different. That's totally something I haven't seen before. And I think that's a lot of the charm and the greatness of this performance, is that it's a totally unique character. And I think the way Jake Gyllenhaal approaches him is something like unlike we haven't really have ever seen, and it's actually totally different from even Jake Gyllenhaal's other performances. That, well, first of all, it's an Oscar crime that he didn't get nominated even for Best Lead Actor. But where someone like Ralph Fiennes is great at playing a character that we've all sort of known before, a certain type of person, and doing that well, and representing that well in something like the honorable mention of Bigger Splash with Harry Hawks. I think Lou Bloom, Jake Gyllenhaal's character here in Nightcrawler, is something that we haven't seen before, that he's a guy that's on the fringes of a society that we barely even interact with or maybe see, and sort of creeps you out maybe in a grocery store. And in a way, this character has never been the forefront of a film in a way like I've seen this before. So Jake Gyllenhaal creates an incredibly magnetic but unique and strange performance, and does this with little things. For example, he never blinks in the movie, so he has these big, bright eyes that sort of stare into your soul and creep you out, but also entice you and allure you. There's incredible intensity from his performance because he doesn't blink. The way Jake delivers lines is direct and precise, and even the way he moves has this sort of straight posture and moves pretty quickly and sort of with a glide and a step to him, because everything he does seems to be, like I said, sort of a guy who's on a fringe of society, so he hasn't had a lot of social interactions or maybe friends, so all of it's been learned from either TV or from looking at other people rather than interacting himself. So he has all these sort of speeches and almost seem like business proposals or scripts that he's reading that maybe he practiced the night before, and comes in and has these things that he's already going to say, and you just have to wait for him to say it, and has these little key phrases that maybe he's read from a book that he's picked up on and is now saying with an authoritarian kind of a way. And I also think that he's a character without sort of any empathy, that he is sort of a sociopathic kind of character, that the movie is structured in a way that as his business sort of succeeds and goes into this world, his morals start to lose. But then I think by the end of the movie, you question his morals in the first place. That have you sort of bought into the lie maybe he's been selling? Has he ever even had a desire? What are his true desires, his motivations? They're mysterious, they're hard to know, that because he has this sort of one-track mind of being so obsessed with this job and so obsessed with this world, that he becomes into it and just completely falls into it. And even his sort of more casual interactions with Rick are all sort of, as soon as we get to know him a little bit more, it's this rehearsed kind of a dialogue, and then that sort of takes us away from it. Or when he pursues Nina, the sort of newscaster who he films these accidents and sells them to news stations, and that's one of, and his sort of news manager that he sells to, he tries to pursue sort of a romantic relationship with her, and the way he does it is through this sort of business proposition proposal, which in a way it's really creepy and strange, and it's unlike how people normally act, or I think I probably should act, but that's not to say it's not kind of engaging and you can't look away because of how pressing and intense he is, and how the intensity I think Jake Gyllenhaal brings to the performance, which Jake does really in a lot of movies, but he really does it on full effect here, that we don't really understand this guy a lot. He's mysterious, and he's our main protagonist, but he's fascinating because we don't understand him, like a serial killer, like Hannibal Lecter. And he clearly possesses an intense amount of ambition and intensity and desire for professional success, but that may mean, putting people under his foot along the way. That anytime you think he's going to have an emotion and maybe an anger, it has less to do with caring and that element, but more has to do with more like a performance failure. And I think there's an unpredictability with this character because we haven't seen anything. I think in that self, Jake's able to create a character that we haven't seen before in the history of cinema, at least I have, or in this kind of a way, is unique, and that's an achievement all on its own. But then how he approaches him, and as a result of that uniqueness, there becomes an unpredictability that you don't know what's going to happen next, and then therefore that creates more tension, which succeeds within the film, but more appreciation of Jake's performance because of the little things he does. Like I said, never blinking, his precise and sort of uptight postured movement. But then that also creates, like I said, an unpredictability and adds just to the overall success of the film. So the performance is so tied to the success of the film that you have to, and because I like the movie so much, you have to respect the performance. And like I said, it's so interesting, it's so intimidating, but it's alluring nonetheless. Then my final pick, which we're going to be talking about in this video, is my number 7 pick, which is Leonardo DiCaprio from Django Unchained.
You would have the same 3 dimples in the same place as old Ben. Hey! Lay your palms flat on that tabletop! If you lift those palms off that turtle shell tabletop, Mr. Pooch is gonna let loose with both barrels that sawed off.
I think Leo had the most interesting decade out of any actor because he worked very few times, and each one of those performances are great performances, which is kind of hard to do for an actor because they do so many movies. But Leo was very selective in his projects, particularly in the second half of this decade, working only a couple times. So here's this decade. So in the beginning, he starts off strong. Shutter Island, Inception, then 2011, and those are in 2010. 2011, he's got J. Edgar. 2012, here, Django Unchained. Then 2013, he has The Great Gatsby and Wolf of Wall Street. Then 2015, he does The Revenant, and then in 2019, he does Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So very sort of front-loaded, then he's been very selective in the second half of this decade. But I could have really chosen pretty much, those are almost all great movies, and they're definitely all great performances. And I could have chosen his Once Upon a Time in Hollywood performance. I could have chosen Shutter Island performance, which I think is just a terrific film that people kind of overlook. I really was hard pressed to not put his Wolf of Wall Street performance because it's so fantastic and funny and physical. But ultimately, if I'm, this is my list, and personally, I'm just totally encapsulated and enraptured with his Django Unchained performance. And I like its position on this list because it shows how a supporting performance can really take over a movie, that he's not in it until he is, and when he is this sort of villainous, contemptuous character that you can't take your eyes off of. So I think the performance works on one hand. In one element, what I appreciate about it is just the sort of career element, that Leo had a great decade, but even before this in 2012, and I don't think he has really done it since, he's playing the villain. He's playing, I think very few stars really at the height of their powers post-Inception, pre-Wolf of Wall Street. This is sort of the peak of him, where they show up in a movie and be like the third lead, be the sort of villain. Very few actors, I think, would have done this, and I think, unfortunately, because Leo is terrific in this and is great to have this sort of villain role, which we haven't seen him before, and maybe will be a representation into the transitionary, the second half of his career, as he sort of ages and gets older and becomes much more selective with his projects. So the biggest movie star of his generation showing up and being a villain, that definitely adds to it. And I think his sort of movie star persona and his intense charisma is definitely adds to the Calvin Candy character, and his performance and him being Leonardo DiCaprio, just that adds to the movie because he's intensely charismatic, which makes us understand why Calvin has been successful in his business. That he'll be intense, and ruthless in some of the Mandingo fights in his treatment towards African Americans. But when he sees Django, who is a free man, he puts on sort of that business proposition, and his morals go out the window because he's interested in just getting, interested in this, doing the business with each other, with Django and with Schultz. So it's this sort of put on a good face, southern charm, charisma that is great, and Leo's terrific at putting this sort of southern twang on this sort of rhythmic Tarantino dialogue, and the way he says it is just music to my ears, and delightful just to hear the sort of alliteration that I think a lot of his lines of dialogue do have. But then also, he leaks out these sort of moments of rage that we understand him, from this sort of fake, in a way, very much business type southern charm element. But then we see these moments of rage when we see his real hatred and villainous contempt for his slaves. We see sort of maybe the real Calvin Candy when that sort of is able to slip out, and that communication with the audience, that we totally understand where this guy is and who this guy is alluring and rewarding. That he is internalizing this conflict, whether it be these small little moments where he's talking to Steven about letting Django in the big house, and he is internalizing all these moments, but that doesn't mean he's not communicating to the audience that we understand that he is a villain. He's not, of course he's a bad guy because he owns slaves and has these terrible Mandingo fights, but also we understand because of sort of the internalized things that are going on within Calvin Candy, but are communicated through Leo's performance. That we as an audience member understand what's going on because we pick up through these social cues that are not in the script, that have nothing to do with Tarantino's dialogue, but that are brought to the performance by Leo. The sort of seething rage and contentment that is building up, that he's trying not to show, because of course Django's a black man and doesn't want to ruin the business deal. And then when he does sort of go off the rails, it's intense and haunting and terrifying, and he will just stare you and pierce you right through the eye, that it's a representation of evil that we can't even imagine. And he's maybe the best, I think, villain of this decade, and he's definitely got one of the best performances in just the way he just shows up. He dominates, he's intense, he's charming in a way, and that sort of balance that Leo's able to do, it tells us so much about this character, that he's successful because of this charm, but he still has these moments of rage, and we understand his true character and his evil intent. And I think what he's also able to do terrific is calibrate and judge different, almost strange reactions to certain events. That when he's in the Mandingo fight and these guys are literally beating each other to the death, he's delightful and joyous. That it's almost a strange reaction to what the normal human reaction would be to that situation. So he's almost doing, and then even in another situation when the dogs go out and attack these slaves, he's very calm and sort of professional in that way. So he's great at sort of calibrating and giving us different reactions to what we would normally expect. And therefore, with those reactions, we tell us, wow, this guy's truly evil. They tell us that, wow, this guy really doesn't mess around, that this guy is a bad guy. And we understand that because of how Leo just approaches the scene by doing something completely different and by challenging us and by keeping it unexpected and always keeping you on your feet so that you're always engaged and interested, while also understanding and learning about his character. It's a great balancing act, his ability to impress but also communicate and also allow you to understand of what Leo does here. Like I said, he's had a great decade, and I could have put any really one of his performances of the decade, which is, you can't really say about any other actor. Really, I could have put them on this list, but ultimately my personal favorite is Django Unchained, and just as a supporting performance, as someone who comes in and dominates, it's hard to beat. So that's about it. Make sure you're staying tuned to next week so you hear my picks of 6 to 2. Remember, you can jump around in the comments below with my timestamps if you don't want to hear the entire video throughout. I give you that option. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. That always helps. And until next time, stay tuned.